Emily, what's on your radar?
Well, I learned something truly ridiculous about Betty White in one of the many tributes to her that aired last week. White's first appearance on television was on an experimental broadcast that aired in 1939. She was 17 years old. That was the same year Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz were released. So, quote, when people started looking at television, I think they were going to have a box in their room. Everybody was like, yeah, it's another passing fad. That's what Frank Sherma of the Television Academy told NBC last week in a tribute to White. Now, what makes this fact about White's life ridiculous is that it puts into perspective the short life of a technology that feels so old. Her career spanned the entire history of television. White lived a long life, but that makes television extremely new, especially for a technology that is now the most popular leisure activity in the country, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and All Common Sense. So consider this headline from US News, quote, outside of sleeping, Americans spend most of their time watching television. Actually, before we started, Ryan and I were reminiscing about Jersey Shore. This is a technology that was a joke when Betty White, a woman who just passed away, first appeared on TV. When Clay Aiken announced his second run for Congress just yesterday, the Democratic hopeful started his announcement video with a walk down memory lane. Quote, back when we first met, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no smartphone, he said. That was less than 20 years ago. We like to think of television as old, radio and photography and cars and airplanes and phones and fast food and birth control too. Nuclear technology feels like history. BuzzFeed even makes us feel nostalgic about the early days of Facebook. But regular books aren't actually that old. These are all inventions that changed the way humans live dramatically, from the way they have sex and reproduce to work and family proximity. Look at this chart from the beginning of Sapiens, a great book by Yuval Noah Harari. Consider that the first dated printed book is about 1,100 years old. Now look at where you would put that on the chart. The Gutenberg Bible is less than 600 years old. These technologies that feel very old to us have existed for essentially a blip on the radar of human existence. When you narrow it down to smartphones and social media, radical changes to human life have been induced in the historical blink of an eye. But they feel old. Now, the reason reading Marx can feel so immediate is that he and the thinkers of the same time period were reacting to the very same adjustments in human life amid the Industrial Revolution. Adjustments that were legitimately progressing human civilization, but at a very serious cost. We're still in this very same kind of fog of war that Marx was in, although the pandemic gave us a little bit of clarity. The best book I read in 2021 was Brett Weinstein and Heather Hang's Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. In it, they argue, quote, our species' pace of change now outstrips our ability to adapt. Quote, we are generating new problems at a new and accelerating rate, and it is making us sick, physically, psychologically, socially, and environmentally, they write. If we don't figure out how to grapple with the problem of accelerating novelty, humanity will panish, a victim of its success. I'm going to read one more block of text from the book's introduction because it just captures the state of affairs very well. Humans are extraordinarily well adapted to and equipped for change, they write, but the rate of change itself is so rapid now that our brains, bodies, and social systems are perpetually out of sync. For millions of years, we lived among friends and extended family, but today many people don't even know their neighbors' names. Some of the most fundamental truths, like the fact of two sexes, are increasingly dismissed as lies. The cognitive dissonance spawned by trying to live in a society that is changing faster than we can accommodate is turning us into people who cannot fend for ourselves. They call our world, quote, hyper-novel. I really think that's a term we should popularize in order to popularize our understanding of modern life, of why we're shockingly overweight, riddled with depression and anxiety, overdosing on synthetic opioids, fighting with strangers thousands of miles away about pop stars, struggling with fertility, and more. When we talk about political news, we must talk about it in this context. When we try to live happier lives just on an individual basis, we should do so in this context. We spent all of last week mired in a nasty relitigation of a national tragedy that mostly danced around the real story. We're not meant to consume information in this way, work in this way, or relate to other people in this way. While folks with Equinox memberships are celebrating obesity, people who work multiple jobs just to live paycheck to paycheck and feed their kids are getting by on whatever they can grab quickly. We need to handle monopolies that are making companies unresponsive to demand. That also goes for politicians who are less responsive to voter demand, as Senator Ossoff is trying to do with his bill banning members from trading stocks. I do hope he can find a Republican co-sponsor for that bill, but people who sense that the system isn't working are right. Some things get better, some things get worse, but if the rate of change for the better slows, man, it feels a whole lot worse. Back in March, Ross Douthat used this chart on patents to illustrate tech stagnation over time, arguing that Robert Gordon was right to say what's happened since the 1970s, quote, wasn't so much the end of innovation as its concentration in just a few sectors, tech above all, after a long period when progress was happening across a much wider range of fields and industries. So that's where we've been, Douthat wrote, echoing his book, The Decadent Society. No flying cars, no jets and stuff, no vibranium or cold fusion, just really sleek and speedy delivery systems for pornography, video games, and, God help us, political commentary. That's not lost. The irony is not lost on me at this very moment. Now, Douthat sees signs of stagnation and or concentration might be coming to an end. If you're looking for paths out of decadence, there's enough technological work coming to fruition to make the 2030s and 2040s look, if not quite like an age of wonders, at least more like what preceded the Apollo program than what has happened since, he wrote. Now, after laying out this dark scenario, as he calls it, Douthat flirted, once again, with some optimism. The dark scenario, he said, quote, assumes that virtual entertainments, simulated realities, and dream palaces can't themselves become the site of a renaissance, the place where creativity takes off and reinvention happens once again. Maybe so. That will depend on our ability to understand technology's interaction with our bodies and demands from politicians and executives to create healthy innovations. Betty White was more than a sitcom legend. She was a symbol of a popular culture that is dying in front of our faces, of a time when more than 50 million people were watching I Love Lucy, as Being the Ricardos points out right away, and technology created mass media that tapped into shared cultural values. You can't really do that anymore because of technology, which is dividing us, and so Betty White is the soft symbol of everything we're losing, from popular sitcoms to water cooler conversations to the shared experiences those created and reinforced. There are advantages and disadvantages to all of this. Absolutely, we're here right now talking to you because of the advantages. But we need to be aware that that is what's happening. Ryan, rank the Golden Girls by quality of their hair. Okay, I won't make you do that. But there's been a lot of conversation about Don't Look Up since its release on Netflix. It's a massively popular film. And I think this gets into some of that, but it just feels really silly to have these conversations about January 6th and climate change without recognizing the fact that just in the last 10 years, the changes to human life have been so dramatic. And just obesity since the year 2000, the spikes in it, the spikes in anxiety and depression, especially among young people, since 2007 when the smartphone was introduced, when the iPhone was introduced. This stuff is dramatic. It is actually affecting materially the daily lives of people as they wake up and go about their 9-to-5s and everything in between that. It's affecting the quality of human sleep. So we're in this context, and our politics seems so divorced from it.
True, though, I don't know how climate fits into that, except that it's going to intersect with it in a way that we're going to be able to see and experience all of the climate catastrophes in real time. Like a lot of us saw, the image of the person on their porch in Kentucky who's just hanging out 1 minute, and the next minute a 12-foot wall of water is coming by and they're clinging for their life. Some continued watching and watched them just get washed away. So having access to that, like that was on, I think that was streamed live on Facebook, mm-hmm. and then shared after that. So the last kind of round of mind-bending modernity in the late 1800s, early 1900s didn't coincide with kind of an apocalyptic climate event. So that I think that'll add to what you're talking about, the anxiety level, because people,
although that's sort of when we started tracking weather data in the way that we have it now.
Right.
Temperatures, et cetera.
Around then, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, although by like the 1860s, 70s, scientists actually already understood the relationship between carbon mm-hmm. in the air and greenhouse gas. They understood greenhouse gas. So we've known for almost 200 years that what the Industrial Revolution was going to do to global temperatures, but now it's really coming in. And I think you're right. It is going to intersect with all of the other anxieties that are produced by this rapidly changing world. Well,
Ariana Grande is in "Don't Look Up," and I think there
is a great single in it.
Yes, right. And I think there are flaws to the metaphor in "Don't Look Up," but in that sense, that's sort of what I'm talking about when I mean climate. Like, "Don't Look Up" taps into this frustration that the American people have, the public has, and this ability to trust anybody. And part of that is because this technology makes it impossible for us to trust each other and for us to litigate some of these really important questions. And if you see something in the sky, you don't trust that it's actually going to come and hit you because nobody knows which experts are right, who to trust, and we're just sort of so divorced from how people are consuming information, how we're talking about information, how we're relating to each other. At least our politics does seem really divorced from that. And I'm glad there are a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle taking on tech, because the monopolies are a huge part of this. But it just seems like we lack an understanding of the fact that we're in, that's why I like the term hyper-novel, like we are in this very weird position as human beings that it's like putting a vacuum cleaner in a pool and trying to clean up the dirt on the floor instead of using one that's meant for water, which they do make. But it's gonna short circuit, and we're kind of short circuiting.
Yep, and in "Don't Look Up," there's the big tech guru who you wonder, how could you persuade anybody that you should ignore a comet coming at the planet, or that the comet hitting the planet is actually good? And it turns out, the comet's filled with all of these rare earth materials that are worth trillions of dollars, and it's going to bring jobs. So they want the jobs that the comet's going to bring to them. And the big tech guy is able to send that propaganda out into the phones of the people that the big tech controls. So everybody should see it if they haven't yet.
Absolutely. It's also just really funny.
And by friend of the show, David Sirota.
By David Sirota. Well, Team Rising joins us next.